Are you interested in stories of action and adventure? If so, I recommend checking out my episode-based book series, The Demon Slayer Psychic, on Kindle Vella. The first 3 episodes are free to read, and new ones drop every single week. That's all I have to say, and now, onto the video. Hello everybody, JGC Anime here, and today we are going to be reviewing The Legendary Hero is Dead, or Yusha ga Shinda. I don't know if I said that right, but we're just going to roll with it. So, I'm sure I'm not the only one who says this, but the only reason I actually really checked out this series was because of its absolutely amazing opening theme. The opening theme for this show is fantastic in terms of music. It's so good. So naturally, I thought, I wonder what the show is like, and yeah. So now I'm here to talk about the show. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about how good the opening is, because it's just a good opening. But moving past that for now, let's just hop right into the show. So in terms of a story summary, basically the whole idea is that this villager, Toka, unintentionally ends up killing the hero by accident, and now he has possessed the body of the hero and has to go on carrying on the hero's legacy and try to make people think that the hero isn't actually dead. And it's just a bunch of comedic stuff that is like this big wacky adventure with him meeting all kinds of people. So yeah, that's not a great description, but it would be too many spoilers if I went too deep into it, so we're just gonna roll with it. So in terms of spoiler-free thoughts, this series surprised me. Honestly, when I was going into this, I figured it would be kind of like a simple, goofy little comedy where some of the jokes would land, but most of them wouldn't. But I'm actually really surprised. I'm really surprised at the fact that the jokes actually landed a lot more than not. I was constantly laughing a lot, and just like these loud ha-ha moments. I am surprised how many times I actually burst out laughing. And the weird part is, the jokes aren't even that funny. I think my sense of humor has just gotten really wonky. But there were a lot of moments of the show that I don't know why I just really couldn't help but laugh. The comedy in this show at times was really good. There were times where it didn't hit as hard. There were times where they just weren't as good, but those weren't that common. In fact, most of the time I was having a very fun time laughing at all the different jokes they created. And not only are the jokes pretty solid, the characters are actually fairly well written as well. Like, I'm surprised how well developed Toka as a character is. Well, I wouldn't say it's for the case with everybody, such as another character called Margaret, who we could talk about a bit later. Her character is kind of almost one-dimensional, but not super one-dimensional. Basically, some of the characters are playing off of tropes, and she, in fact, does play off one of those tropes, which is fine. In fact, while most of the characters in this show do play off of tropes, sometimes they're really good, such as Toka's childhood friend Yuna, who I honestly think is one of the better characters in this story, like in this series, as she and Toka are probably some of the best characters in the show, at least for me personally. And their interactions between one another, while somewhat simplistic and the normal back and forth type stuff that you see between two characters who are friends, it's just, even though it might not be super unique and interesting, it's still very fun to watch. And another thing I kind of want to talk about without spoiling it is actually, I think Toka's backstory is very interesting. It's not like something super unique or special, but it has this interesting thing to it where it makes you realize he's more than what he is right now. And while, again, that's another trope that's pretty common, I enjoyed it here. And yeah, moving on to something else I want to talk about. There's this thing in the show that really isn't a spoiler because it's literally promoted in all the trailers and material. The weird obsession with thighs. And for me personally, I don't care for that. They work fine in the forms of the jokes, like whenever the main character obsesses over a thigh or something, it's funny, but I don't understand the appeal for myself personally. It's fine if you like it. It's perfectly fine if you like it. I just didn't think that much of it. In fact, I just kind of let it run its course. I didn't think much about it, and that's all I can really say about that, because that's all that really happened. I didn't think about it. I just kind of let it roll with the punches and stick with that. Moving on to something a little more relevant, I'd like to talk about the actual story itself. The story is kind of like a similar formula to a lot of stories out there that they'll cut things into segments and just have them play throughout the season. And since this season has 3 different segments, one is like the start of the journey, one is another part, and then the final part is also just another part. And we get to kind of like expand on the world and stuff like that. It's really interesting. And I definitely think the final storyline of the 3 that were covered in this season is probably my favorite. And it's actually really nice, and I think it definitely sticks around for a longer part of the season, but it's still really nice. And yeah, overall, I do think that this story has a lot of great moments. It's very funny. The characters are interesting to follow. And while it's not something super, like, unique, it's not something beyond incredible, it's still charming in its own way, and I really liked that. It really surprised me with how much fun it was. It had some great comedy in there. I was constantly having fun while I was watching, and I had a good time. And yeah, that's all I can really talk about without spoiling, so we're just gonna hop into the spoiler section now. Here's the timestamps from the spoilers, and if you have seen the show, I'd recommend sticking around, hear my thoughts, but if you haven't, you should skip to the end so you don't get any spoilers. And yeah, I'm gonna count down from 5 and enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so going into spoilers, the first thing I want to talk about is how I feel about each of the stories that's told this season. The first story is this adventure where the hero, aka Toka, has to prove now that he's in the hero's body that he is in fact the hero, even though he's not, although it is revealed that he does become the hero by accident because the sword recognizes him as the hero just by complete coincidence by the second storyline, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But the storyline in this one, it's fine. It's definitely my least favorite of the three. It's just kind of fine. It's nothing super special. It's basically just one of the hero's party members wanted to take over the body for himself. However, the girl aka the necromancer that brought Toka into the hero's body, Anri, is not having it. She's like, no, I chose Toka as the hero because he was powerful enough to slay the hero, so he must be powerful enough to handle all this, which is pretty funny. But I definitely feel like that storyline was just kind of the weakest. It didn't really hit with me as much as the other stories did. It was just kind of average, and that's probably why at first I wasn't too sure if I'd like this show or not, because the story wasn't particularly interesting or funny. There were a few good jokes here and there, but overall it was just kind of meh. But then we get to the second storyline, which is when they run into the Princess Margaret, who I mentioned earlier, and it surprised me that there was actually a lot more of a well-handled part of the story this time around, as they got a bit more into the characters in this world, and we kind of get an idea of what's going on in the capital and like the kingdoms and stuff like that. Although, as I'm watching, I do realize one thing. The main characters are terrible at keeping the fact the hero's dead a secret. Like, they are constantly unintentionally spilling the beans. People are constantly figuring out, throughout this entire storyline, everybody is figuring out that the hero is dead. And I'm just sitting there thinking, wow, you guys really didn't think all this through, because you're getting figured out left and right. What the heck is happening? Why the heck are you guys so bad at this? And while it's definitely funny at how poor they're doing at keeping it a secret, it's also kind of a bit irritating, because the whole point of Toka taking over the hero's body is to set up and keep the whole thing a secret that the hero is dead, and they're just not doing a great job at that. Granted, the ones that do learn about it are either demons that die or people who are fine with keeping a secret, but it's still kind of funny how terrible they are at keeping things a secret. But yeah, returning to what I was talking about before with the second storyline, with Margaret's introduction and her joining the crew, it's not a bad storyline. I actually really liked it. I didn't think it was as good as the final storyline, which isn't super special either, but it still has this nice little charm to it I really like. This storyline was fine. Was a bit creeped out by the guy with a skeleton fetish, but it's fine. It was kind of decent. It creeped me out a little bit at times, but still overall a pretty solid story arc. But yeah, moving on to the final one, which is the final storyline of the season, which is kind of like this zombie invasion where people are going to be turned into demons within 24 hours if they didn't defeat the main demon who's causing all of this. And it's honestly probably my favorite storyline of the three, as I mentioned before, because it's longer, gives you a bit more understanding of what's going on here. It gives you more characters to look at and understand, plus some really funny moments where our main protagonist, Toka, tries to, after possessing his friend's body, tries to keep looking at her thighs, which, as I mentioned, while I don't entirely like the thigh stuff can also be pretty funny at times as well, which makes me laugh. And we even got to go through this little memory bit where we see Toka's life as he moved throughout things, and you realize, wow, this guy's actually had it pretty rough for what's meant to be ordinary villager. It's really interesting seeing how Toka takes up the mantle of hero, especially with how near the end he ends up putting the hero into his body who helps defeat this demon, and it's kind of cool, I'll be honest. And it's just cool seeing all the different stuff that the finale threw at you, because what I thought would be the big drag of the season because of how long the story was, it went by in the blink of an eye. Like, I was surprised how quickly the storyline went by. We were getting all these cool new characters, this world stuff, and it was just so interesting, especially since it seems we still got a lot of adventures ahead of us in coming future, including having Toka learn how to grow his mana since he's at level 1, aka the mana level what a baby should be at, which makes me excited for if there is a season 2. I honestly am completely down. The comedy at times is really nice, and overall, I was having such a good time during that storyline. I was really enjoying it, especially since we got to dive a bit deeper, and not just on Toka, but also on Yuna, who kind of gets a bit more of an explanation to her character in this whole story arc, which is really nice. And yeah, there's just so many nice things I could talk about with this show. It's not perfect by any means. It's definitely a more average show, but I was having such a fun time. Like, it's hard to give it too many negatives because I was having such a fun time while watching. So it's really hard to talk about it in any negative light. And so yeah, it may have been average, but I had a dang good time watching this average show. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun. Although there were some jokes that didn't hit as well. Like, whenever the hero, Toka tries to slide the stockings onto the girls, it wasn't that funny to me. I thought it was just kind of It was just kind of a thing that was happening. And that and a few other small repetitive jokes occurred. And while they weren't really my thing, they're fine. I can move past them because overall, I had a really good time watching this show. The characters were fun to watch. While not all the villains were favorites, I definitely still had a very solid time overall. And yeah. That's all I have to say, so we're at the conclusion of this video, and what are my final thoughts? Overall, had a good time. It's nothing super special, but at the same time, I really had a good time with it. It was constantly making me laugh, and I just had such a fun time seeing these characters and their adventures, and yeah, that's why I give The Legendary Hero is Dead a very high 7 out of 10. Definitely want to check out a second season if that ever happens. A delightful little fun time, and overall, just fun to really dive into these characters in this world. It was a lot better than I thought it might have been, and yeah, definitely worth checking out. So yeah, that's all we have to say. So thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I always look new anime fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!